talking with Alberto Chapa, if you know him, at the headquarters in
Yeah.
Pasadena a couple months ago, and Ableton asked me to do a weekend retreat there. Your name came up, and I was like, man, Christian would be an awesome person to have on the podcast. And he's like, you should definitely hit him up. So he encouraged me to reach out, and here we are.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. No, the pleasure is all mine. It's an honor having you on the podcast. I've had a lot of other people from Ableton on the podcast, but you are one of the originals. You've been with Ableton since the beginning. I would love just to hear some of your insights about the early days of the company. I mean, it's come a long way since even before 2001.
Yeah, I started October 2001, and that was before we had the release of Live 1.0, and I started with version 0.9 or 8, a
Yeah.
very, very early version. And I was basically hired as like a tech support back in those days. I was happy to get accepted because I was very interested in, well, obviously music technology and software, because I was getting very deep into this stuff myself in terms of programming, learning programming languages and so on. So I was very happy to get my foot into that door, sort of, which was at the time in 2001, it felt like the world was going to change with computers and music software anyway. So yeah, it was a good start.
I mean, that was like a pretty interesting time because I think Steinberg released the VST shortly before that,
That was
right?
before VST came out, something like 98 or 99.
Yeah.
So the VST technology. Max MSP came out shortly before, if I remember correctly. But the reason was really for all that the software market itself was, as we all know, it was like especially in the recording industry, it was like basically tape machines in digital form, right? So that was music software was. And Ableton was about to change that. I mean, you had then, of course, VST and like things like Generator, which later became Reactor from Native
Oh, yeah.
Instruments, these kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
things, which
Yeah.
were VST instruments. And then you had, of course, experimental software like Max MSP or C Sound or Super Collider and these kind of things. But in terms of recording software, it was a very rigid thing back in those days. And this has changed now completely. The landscape is very, very different nowadays, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were there during the Stone Age of recording, basically.
Well, I would say the dawn of real-time audio processing in that sense, because back then I had one of the first Apple laptops, which came out, I think it was after the Wall Street. It was called Pismo, Apple Pismo, and it was like the Apple portable computer, basically. And on this, it was a G3, if people remember that G3 computer. It has 333 megahertz. I remember that very
Wow.
well. And anyway, but with these computers, you could run the software and you could real-time process audio signals, meaning you could have a reverb, a delay, and these kind of things, and granular synthesis in that sense in real time. And that made it possible with these machines to be on stage with a laptop, basically, which was a novel thing. I remember people in the 90s coming with like huge portable computers, stacking them up on stage, right?
Yeah.
And so this was the time when this changed, and that was really great because that was important.
Definitely come a long way since then, and I'm glad it's changed. I wouldn't want to have to carry a server rack just to be able
Exactly.
to play
Of
a
course,
couple tracks.
it was obvious that this will become that way, but it was
Yeah.
not obvious that Ableton will be part of the whole movement in that large scale, because back then we were like starting out as like a very small company, and the idea, we believed in the idea, obviously, of course, but it was not clear like how many years can we survive. There were other companies much bigger than us, and I always had the fear that they will just copy what we did and then we are gone because they had more. Nonetheless, we had our niche and we could grow this niche, and now the niche became the status quo, basically. Back then, when version 1 came out, it was like, okay, it was a great thing, because we all thought that was a thing which is necessary. But nonetheless, it was totally unclear how the majority will accept that, or how people will accept that. And then after version 1 came out, there were very early adopters of that software who were kind of really searching always for new stuff to work with. And these people, they were really helping a lot to spread the idea. Because remember, in those days, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have these things.
Yeah.
You had to release software on CDs, and the CDs were ending up in stores, and you had to send people to the stores to get those things. And you couldn't
Yeah.
just like watch YouTube videos, or it didn't exist.
Right.
So the whole feedback loop of how successful are we just is very much longer in those days, you know. And now it's
Yeah.
like even before you have a release, you kind of have all the information from and more feedback than you can ever need, and so on. So that's
Yeah.
another aspect of those times, that you did something, you believed in it, you made the best you could do, and then you basically had to rely on that people grasp the idea, and that they basically that share this enthusiasm for the whole thing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's evolved quite a bit since back then. What versions or updates were the most revolutionary or impactful from your perspective?
Well, obviously, yes. I mean, first, the version one was, of course, very, very important
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
introduced the whole concept. But then it was like audio only, right? And of course, people said, "Hey, that's great that you have audio, but in order to use it for more compositional work, we need MIDI because MIDI, you know." And then, of course, we had to do MIDI and the MIDI editor, and make MIDI work, and so on. So
That was version 4 was MIDI. Is that right?
I try to remember. It was either 3 or 4,
Okay.
probably 4.
Yeah.
So that was an important one. Then when we did Max for Life, that was version 8. That was also an important one. Yeah, because that
Yeah.
that
8
also
was
was like a
big.
big commitment to something in our world. And it was to me a big relief because before version 8, the software was already quite established, but
Yeah.
also it was like if you are a tinkerer, it was a kind of closed box. I mean, maybe if you're a VST developer, you could write a VST which does your stuff, but you couldn't do it as like a technology interested person. You could not really write your own plugins and so on. It was a hard thing to do. And now with Max for Life, the
Yeah.
introduction of that, you could just audio processing within the application with Max for Life, or MIDI processing and so on, and or even video processing or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of a really, for me, a big revelation and a big step forward. So, but
For
that's of
sure.
course my personal take on that.
I jumped in at the beginning of the release of Live 8, and
Mhm.
the very first push, I think, was developed at the end of 8 when before 9 came out, I believe.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was another big step. Of course, the whole hardware development side of Ableton. That was another, or whatever, branch of the tree. Yeah,
That's a whole nother animal in itself. And I had
yeah.
Jesse Terry on the podcast, and he shared some really interesting insights about
Oh yeah,
even just using Legos to
of
prototype
course.
the push and all this other fun
Yeah,
stories.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You've worked on a lot of projects over the years, obviously at Ableton. You helped with some of the development of Operator, which is like,
Well, the operator development was very minimal because back then I was still in tech support and not really in product development. But I was always with Robert. I was very in exchange of ideas, and I had this suggestion, and it was adopted, thankfully.
didn't have something to do with the velocity relationship with the oscillator, or is that?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because I was very into also writing little FM operators in Max, and I've already found this a very musical addition to it. So
Yeah, of course.
it's a tiny function in that and thing. So I wouldn't take too much credit for operator itself. So
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, just even being involved in such a
yeah, I
huge
mean,
instrument, that instrument is such a staple, and it's, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it hasn't really changed much since its development.
we did add some filter types, but the fundamental essence of operator has been relatively unchanged for all these years. There are of course a lot of ideas how to change, how to evolve it, but then there's also, because it is what it is. It's like a mini MOOC in some way, you know, like the mini
Yeah,
MOOC. Why do we need to evolve a mini MOOC? That you do something different than probably like a Voyager, maybe, or
yeah,
something. Like if this metaphor works for operator. But operator is kind of a really nice condensed version of FM synthesis, which is, well, of course, there are millions of features you could think about, which others have maybe, and we don't. But that is also one of the strengths of the thing, that it's kind of in a way limited, but within those limitations, there's a lot. So
yeah. I don't know too many stock instruments that haven't fundamentally changed too much since their inception for more than 20 years.
Me neither, but of course, I mean, since it's integrated in the software, it's a different thing than, let's say, a VST or so. So it's hard to compare. In Logic, you also have some instruments, as far as I know, which are relatively unchanged, but I don't think they did age so well as Operator, so gracefully.
Yeah,
But
it's
that's
true.
again just
It's timeless.
my 5 cents here. Yeah.
No, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, man. Well, you worked on a lot of other stuff, like the creation of Meld in Live 12 is very, very cool. For people who maybe haven't played with Meld, what would be your pitch as far as what it makes it unique or special?
So Meld was an addition for Live 12 where the focus was on a more textual synth and a more, let's say, versatile synth, because it incorporates a different synthesis techniques in one device, and it also is kind of has two engines where you can combine different synthesis types again within the thing, while the operation itself should be relatively straightforward and simple. So that was the kind of the tagline of Meld, and also to differentiate. I mean, you have to see it in relationship to the other synths we have. And so the idea was to have something which is more textural, maybe even more modular and experimental, as something like Drift or something like Wavetable. Wavetable is a very sharp knife, I would say, and
Yeah.
Meld itself is more like it morphs between a lot of things, right? It can be a lot of things. You can make beautiful drum sounds with it, but you can especially make very interesting textural ambient sounds with the thing, because it has a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
modulation capabilities and so on. It has a big two engines with two modulation matrices and so on, and MPE, of course. And so that was the idea behind Meld, basically to provide a counterpart to the other synths, where
Mm.
you can do things you can't do easily with the other stuff. So that, yeah.
The relationship between the oscillators, you can do things that aren't in most synths,
Yeah,
which is
you can
really,
you
really
even have some
powerful.
cross modulation between the two engines and things like that. So it really, I mean, even after creating and working it with so long, it always surprises me what you can do with it. And I love the fact that you have something which kind of there's no end to it, basically. So
Yeah,
I love, and with Operator it's similar. It's of course it's always FM with Operator, but
sure.
there's, even after 20 years, I discover new things with Operator, and that's amazing. I mean, and I know it
Yeah,
inside out. And with Meld, it's kind of similar. And I love this. Personally, I love these kind of things, which kind of are, in that sense, timeless, because you can always discover new facets and new angles of something. And that's great. No,
yeah,
it's not like, well, again, maybe a mini Moog, if you, coming back to that thing, it's very clear what it is, but it also is timeless in that sense, right? And
yeah.
or a Fender Stratocaster or something, or Telecaster. It's a timeless guitar. There's not, and even though it's what it is, and with Meld it's the same. There's no, but we will add some more oscillator types to it, actually.
There are some really fun oscillator waveforms shapes in here. I mean, the bubble was
The
kinda
bubble,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah, the
the
bubble and
rain and the
the
bubble.
rain. Yeah, they're fun. There's some fun stuff in here,
And
and the
that was a thing, to get something in that software which is maybe kind of fun, experimental in a way, but also just sparking new ideas somewhere, because you can combine it, of course, with other things. So
yeah.
why not? Why not?
Yeah, why not? And not to, like, even mention, just the sub oscillator on this thing is probably my favorite of any of the other
Oh yeah,
synths, and,
mine is a
like,
noise oscillator. I love this noise oscillator
the
thing.
noise is nice. Just even the sub just out of the box, it just hits. It's, like, fat, and it just sounds great without having to do much to it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, cheers to you for developing this thing. It's really cool, and it's
Thank
really
you.
unique, and I think that with so many new updates and features of Live 12, sometimes it's easy to miss some of these updates and features, but I encourage anybody to go play
I
with
mean,
Meld.
I mean, of course, it's for people who love synthesizers. I mean, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely shows. And also your music as well, like, you have, like, some really cool textures and sound design in some of the tracks I've listened to that you've released. Are you still working on your own music these days?
Oh, of
Like
course. I mean, that's. I mean, I mean, I'm doing that for almost 30 years now, and but
yeah,
it's important to me. So
yeah,
it's like, to me, that's what I mean with full circle. Like, making music using these things which I create with teams and so on myself, and also in other creations, hardware and so on, as you can see in the back. It's very important for me to do this, and because it's like, oh well, it's what I am and what makes
Yeah.
me. Yeah, and it's just part of my life. So such a strong part that I can't give it up or don't want to give it up. Even when I will be retired, I will do this. So there's just no escape.
It's good therapy, right? I see a lot of people who are either Ableton certified trainers or people that work at Ableton, and it seems like at some point it's easy to be so focused on the work and the projects that sometimes the reason you got into that in the first place was for the love of the music and the creation of it. And sometimes it's easy. I see people get so caught up or busy with time or whatever, they kind of neglect the creating part of the music.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, because it's work. I creating stuff is hard work, in my opinion. I mean, it's fun,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a hard work. But again, I mean, it's a choice you have to make, or you because I mean, some other people have kids and whatnot. I don't. I have. I mean,
Your kids are your synthesizers. You have a lot of
well,
kids.
I wouldn't go that far, but a little bit in that direction, maybe, because that's my passion, sort of. My passion is, I mean, not only synthesizers, it's general music instruments. Like I also play guitar, or I mean, if I would have the option, I would have a gigantic big room with drum kit and vibraphone and every every imaginable music piece of equipment. So
Yeah.
to, but yeah, I need to limit myself with a bunch of synthesizers and so on. So that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I know you play a lot of instruments too, and that like helps feed into like the creative, fun, playful side
Yeah.
of what you do.
I
Um,
mean, it's the interest in sound creation, in sound designing, and how this what it makes you feel, sort of. You know, how do
mm,
you react to sound? And that's like my challenge, sort of. My like, what can I, what feelings can I create, and how do I, what can I, well, basically give to the world in that sense with my own music or with the instruments I create with my team and so on. So that's all. It's not only commercial aspects, but it's also like this, I don't know, an aspect which is more emotional in that sense. You know,
yeah, and that was actually one of the questions I sent you is like how do you maintain a connection to the emotional intent of making the music while working with very complex tools and systems, such as like developing, a new Max for Live patch or something else. Like, how do you balance the connection of like the making music side versus the super technical side?
yeah. I mean, it's indeed sometimes a challenge to kind of dive out again from this zooming in, right?
Hmm.
Because let's say it's weekend, it's Saturday, and when it's Saturday, I just go into my studio, switch on the machines, and just play. I don't want to think about it, but of course, when I play the stuff, sometimes it sparks an idea of, oh, I need to kind of incorporate something, a function which I thought makes sense into the software. So I make some notes, and maybe during the week this might find its way into the software somewhere somehow. So it's kind of again full circle, but it's like, sometimes I just want to play guitar or something, or just noodle on a synthesizer, and I don't want to think about how it all works. I just not want to use this stuff, and I think so. And I'm a user and a creator at the same time, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard it said really well from a couple different people about having right brain and left brain sessions.
Like, yeah, that's probably the thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I try to adopt that too. Is like I'll have times where I organize my sound packs or library of sounds in the browser or whatever, and that's my left brain, and then my right brain is just getting into that flow state and not thinking, and everything's already set up and prepared just to play and have fun.
But it's like a focusing also. Where do you put your focus? And sometimes it doesn't work, so you can't really focus on that one thing. Then you need to acknowledge that and just don't do it.
Yeah, that's true. I do have a couple other questions I wanted to hit on that I think is really cool with some of the work you've done. One of them is developing Echo.
Echo, yeah.
What was that process like? Were there any interesting stories in the development? Obviously, it's like inspired by the Roland Space Echo.
I'm also a big fan of it because of the mechanics. But since we talk software, it's not a mechanical thing, but you can create the impression of something mechanical. And so one of the interesting challenges was to kind of create these artifacts into Echo. Like you
Mm,
can dial in artifacts into Echo, and that of course is something where you need to think about, well, how can we do that, and what is the best way to do it? What is a way which is kind of natural for the for the lack of a better word,
yeah.
and so on. So that was, and you need to do some research about this. How how others might do it, how you might, and just research different ways of doing that. And that's generally true. You kind of look at an area and look at the different ways how you would get to the end of something, and then you need to make decisions. What works here, and what is a good thing. So that is always a challenge. And with echo, one of the challenges was actually the visualization of the feedback. So you have the echo tunnel, and
Yeah.
and so the echo tunnel was like a little. The visualization was very dear to me for that thing, because I looked at all the other competitive, like other software, what how they do the visualization or something, and I was not happy with that. So to me, it was like the ideal thing would be a tunnel, right? And so we did. I think no one else has a tunnel for echo. I don't know if anyone has a tunnel, but we did this tunnel. But it had its challenges because with the feedback, and now it's all very precise.
Mhm.
And you also need to make sure that you don't get into this what is called Morier patterns. Morier patterns are when you have dense lines accumulating, and then you get different patterns on top of it. Anyway, that's very very detailed. But anyway,
Yeah.
that was a challenge to get that right, to make it look as it sounds, basically, to make it look as it sounds.
Yeah, I know, it's fun to look. It makes sense too, like, if you're having a visualization of what a delay feedback is, it makes sense, kind of like
But it's very unusual. But I find it very recognizable in that sense, and it's not like stock of the mill visualization or something like that.
no, not at all. I mean, I like the tunnel effect, and I haven't seen that in any other device at all,
Great,
and you get the left side and the right side, it's offset
exactly.
too, so
Yeah.
you can kind of dial that in really well visually.
And for some reason, I was really stuck on the tunnel thing and really wanted to have that. And now I have it, so I'm happy.
It's a good looking tunnel. Yeah,
Yeah,
you
it's a good
crushed it.
looking tunnel. Yeah,
It is.
the time tunnel.
And then the built-in filter. There's so many features in this thing, and like it's the modulation tab as
Yeah,
well is
it's
like
quite a workhorse in that sense. Like, you can do a lot of different things with it. Nonetheless, it's one of the things which I would also like to evolve over the years, but that's generally challenging because we have so many fishes to fry, so to
yeah,
speak. Yeah, we have a lot
yeah,
of things nowadays in life, and we need to make sure that everything is on an equal level, so to speak, and nothing like falling behind too much and so on. So
yeah,
over in the last years, we made sure that we update a lot of things, like also visually update them, technically update them, which
yeah,
is in itself then again challenging because you don't want to change the original sound. You want to add to the original sound and so on. So it's tricky, but fun.
I don't know if you could say this on the podcast, but if you were to potentially add features to Echo, like what are some things that might be nice?
Well, currently there is no spring reverb in Echo. There
Mhm.
is an Echo reverb simulation or a reverb algorithm which is different from a spring Echo, and I would love to have a spring echo, of course,
That would be
because that
nice.
would be much closer to the space echo, which has a spring reverb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
So
could
right now,
create you could
sorry,
create something pretty similar using hybrid reverb, right? Because it does have a spring convolution
right,
in
you
there.
use hybrid reverb, which is convolution based. You can, of course, just have a spring. Yes, it's
Yeah.
a convolved spring. Yeah,
Yeah. That would actually be pretty nice if you had a
that
similar
would be
option.
nice indeed. Yes, but back when we did echo, we didn't had a convolution thing, and the convolution reverb hybrid came later. So, but now we could. Well, we could if we wanted to
Yeah.
have some convolution in Echo, and I think that would be nice.
That would be nice. It's already there. Just copy and paste it over to Echo under
Copy
reverb,
and
and you'll be
paste. That's
good.
what I tell the developers. They say, well,
It's that easy. Just copy paste.
the thing is, it's always easy to say just let's copy and paste this or so, but in reality, software
Yeah.
development is it's very 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 different, and I was surprised by that too. Like how hard it is to make something which is long lasting. It's easy to
Yeah.
make something which is quick and fun and it works, but something like operator which lasts 20 years or so, there's a lot of thought involved which is not obvious to people who are not involved in such a piece of Mac software structure and so on. And
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate part, and that's why sometimes things take a long time. Yes.
Yeah. That makes sense. You also creating the DrumSynths, which was
Oh
a
yeah, I did
really, really
them.
cool update. That was what, Live 9?
I think
Sounds like
so. Good,
mine.
good question. Live 9 or 10. Yeah. I did an initial version, which is not as good as the version we have now.
I don't know about that. I think it was pretty solid, honestly. It just had more features. It's pretty
Yeah,
stripped.
okay. Well, I wasn't happy with the initial version. I had with the initial drums, and there were a lot of modulations, but they didn't really make sense so much. So I learned with making drum synths.
Mm,
So now the version is very solid, but nonetheless, I also think there's stuff to be improved, and we keep on working on that, I think. But generally, I'm a big fan of drum synthesis, and I like all
me too.
these syncussions and Simmons and Roland TR-808s and so on, all this stuff which synthesizes something into a drum sound. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
So I did that kind of almost, no, not completely by myself, but almost by myself completely. Yeah, the drums and stuff. Yeah,
They sounded good. And you could, like I said, there's a lot of features you could dial them in and be pretty surgical with the sound you're sculpting.
exactly.
And then they rolled out the DS
Yeah,
drums, so DS snare, DS, which I love.
exactly.
They sound incredible as well, but they're very stripped down,
Exactly. Yeah.
which is great for just like if you wanted something quick and easy.
Yeah.
But what inspired the drum synth devices? Was there a specific drum synthesizer that you tried to replicate, or
Oh,
was this just
not
like,
really. I mean, as I said, I did a lot of these things back in the days with the Nord Modular and also with other types of software environments. So I did always do these things in Max MSP, of course,
mhm,
and Nord Modular. So I always did my own kicks and snares and whatnot because I love it. It's fun,
yeah,
and it makes it unique. So the idea was to make something which works for different genres, of course, and not it's not like a copy of the TR-808 or any other thing, but it has its own feel. Let's put it
yeah,
that. So that was the idea for that, because there are lots of copies nowadays out there from for all kinds of things. But I find that interesting to look at schematics and I made an 808 snare and made all these things, but they exist already in so much variety. So I thought it's more fun to kind of cook up something myself. Yeah.
yeah,
And I mean, they're not very complicated in that sense. That the devil is more in the detail of how to get the pitch curves right and so on. What is the right pitch equation for something and so on.
yeah,
That is the challenge sort of for these things. But generally, if you look at them, they're quite simple. There's a noise generator, a sine wave, and they're kind of
mm,
mixed together with some envelopes,
yeah.
to put it mildly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's actually a good transition into talking about Max for Cats and OSCiLLOT, which
Yeah.
I discovered OSCiLLOT a long time ago, and I thought
Mm.
that was a really great. It was like the gateway drug for Max for Live.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It got me into that a little bit more because it was such an easy drag to drop interface of building your own modules really quickly and easily and just patching them together, which was really cool. And you started Max for Cats.
I mean the Max for Cats I did start because I did a lot of Max for Live and Max devices before there was Max for Live for free, and then I thought, well, I need to step up my game. I mean, free software is great, but I wanted to learn to be commercial with like marketing, like making videos, making a website, making a logo, making a jingle for and so on. And it was for me a learning experience for myself and a challenge to make a product, and I made a lot of Max for Cats products. I made t-shirts and buttons and whatnot. So it was a
Yeah.
fun spare time thing, so to say. And
That's a pretty big investment as a spare time thing.
a couple of years ago, it became quite a big investment. So I did work a lot on OSCiLLOT and some other thingies, indeed.
Mm,
Now I had to strip it back a bit because my day work is well full.
yeah.
So, but nonetheless, I still want to continue with OSCiLLOT, but it's challenging because it's a lot of work. Yeah.
Hey, just wanted to let you know about Audient interfaces. If you're looking for a new interface or if you're just thinking about upgrading, definitely check out the Evo audio interface line by Audient. They sent me their Evo 16 and I'm absolutely obsessed with it. It comes with a lot of really good features such as their award-winning Evo preamps, the smart gain technology. So basically you just click a button and then it automatically sets the input level for you so you can just start playing your guitar, start jamming out on your synth, and everything is set up and ready to go. It also has audio loopback, a motion UI control system. It has dedicated headphone amps. The latency is really good. A lot of really amazing features. I highly recommend you check out the Evo audio interface line. You won't be disappointed. Check out the links in the show notes for more information about audience interfaces. I mean, I've seen so many Max for Cats devices and instruments over the years. Some of my favorite was Bangle. You were a part of
Bengal, yeah.
Bangle. That was probably my first modular digital instrument that I actually really loved,
Okay, great.
and
Bengal,
it sounded so good.
for those who don't know, it's also a semi-modular FM synthesizer, basically, which is kind of a little bit inspired by Operator because it also has a bunch of features, but it has also very different features and has built-in effects and so on. And again, I'm a big fan of semi-modular stuff,
Yeah.
semi-modular stuff. So you can just play it out of the box, kind of, but also have a
Mhm.
patch panel where you can patch all kinds of things into each other. And I mean, this whole concept of patching, well, the modular boom is kind of still going on, like
Yeah.
in the Eurorack world, and I think in the software world, it's also fun. I mean, I find it fun to put even virtual cables from point A to point B.
Mhm.
So yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a good paradigm because it's visual. I love the visual aspect of it. I mean, I also love modulation matrices where you just dial in the numbers and have like targets and sources. But here
Yeah.
you physically have to move the mouse from A to B. To me, that's like a different mental model, and I love that
Yeah.
visuality of it, the visual aspect, because
Yeah. And it saves a lot of room in your studio and money.
well, yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
for those who want to experiment with stuff and how would it sound if I do that? And well, just try
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, that was probably one of the things that actually helped me to really dive into the just learning modular in general and patching was just
Ah, okay, that's
that
cool.
was the first one I really played with. I was like, I should dive more into this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
when that first came out.
I mean, nowadays there are lots of. I mean, when OSCiLLOT came out, there weren't so many software modulars. There were a bunch of commercial ones, and but
Mhm.
nowadays there are lots of even free ones which are pretty good. So
Yeah.
also, I mean, OSCiLLOT when came it out maybe 8 years ago or something. So I can't really say
Yep. VCV Rack is fun too. That's a free
exactly.
one.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
came later. Yeah.
Yeah. That one's pretty popular
But
too.
also, I mean, one of the major development efforts or interests of OSCiLLOT was to make it polyphonic. And
Mm.
so it's a polyphonic modular system, which is, there are not so many polyphonic modular systems again. And again, that comes a little bit from the Nord Modular. Do you know that it was the hardware thing from Klaviyo? Do you know that one?
No.
Nord Modular was in the early 2000s. It was like a hardware module, and you could connect it to a computer. And on the computer, you had a software running, and you could patch things like in OSCiLLOT, but the actual processing was done on the hardware.
Ah,
So, um,
interesting.
yeah,
That could be pretty fun for even performing live if you wanted to save your
it was,
computer's.
and people did that a lot.
Yeah.
Like people like Autechre and so on, they use these things.
Yeah.
But the company doesn't do them anymore, and so it's
Hmm.
abandoned. So yeah, and there's no equivalent as far as I know in that sense, where you have a hardware unit and the software does the visual patching aspect.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. That's pretty cool. Is there any new technology or things that you're seeing, whether in the live world or the production world, that's just fascinating to you that you think is interesting that you've discovered recently?
Oh, good question. I mean, there are many things we could talk about here. We could talk about AI. we could
Yeah.
talk about we could talk about FPGA oscillators, which are recently saw the dawn of light more, like in different forms. And
Okay.
this is interesting to me as well. But generally, I don't know. There are so many recreations of old things. Like nowadays, you even have a new synclavier, right?
Hmm.
Not sure if you know that. Oh, I have one actually here, right? So this is a synclavier.
Oh, wow.
And the synclavier, now it's a little box, but in the 80s, that was like a really big synthesizer, which did cost as much as a house. And now you can now you can buy it as like a small box. Isn't that nice?
That's crazy.
Yeah. So there's a lot of these things where a lot of things are being recreated. You see that also with traditional companies like Sequential, Profit 5, or Oberheim. redoing synthesizers from the 70s. So that aspect is great to me. And in terms of novel things, it's interesting. I wish there would be more than there is. So, for example, additive synthesis I still find very interesting, but
Mhm.
also very hard to realize. And I think there would be a lot of potential to do things with a visual interface and so on. But I mean, this is like a very big topic. And
Sure.
again, we could talk about AI, which I personally have some interest, but also I find it very difficult.
It is a big topic. I think that, I had this conversation with Ben Casey actually, not too long ago about the AI and what does that look
Mm.
like for the future of music production. And he was talking about how the most interesting AI projects are enhancing workflow, not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but like
Yeah,
one interesting Max for Live idea or AI plugin, whatever it would be to helping just the finishing of the song. So you've got these tracks, but inside the DAW, like you have these clips, you've got these tracks. A lot of artists really struggle with getting past that first 30-40% of the creation,
but
right?
that's.
Like
I
you,
mean,
I think
I
that would be cool.
guess you are right. That might be a really interesting use case, but I'm completely against it because I think that's the artist's work. It's the work, and the other thing is the fun creation part, and the rest is the work. So to kind
Yeah.
of have, I find it very easy to come up with like 8 bars of amazing something, right?
Yeah.
But how do you make out of those 8 bars amazing something a 3.5 minute amazing song? With a
Exactly.
structure and an intro and like and all these things you need, which are, and to me that's the hard work part. But people, I mean, that the unfortunate thing is that sometimes it's people don't want to invest this hard work.
That's
That's what I.
true.
They want to have the fun part and oh, music making it fun, which is great too. But of
Yeah.
course, then maybe those people need AI. But I don't know if that makes the song really good then in the end. Not sure.
No, I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of people who just want fast, easy success. And there's a lot of beauty in the creation process of having to do that hard work and unexpected accidents that
Yeah,
if you really push through it, you're going
yeah,
to get a different result than some computer or whatever.
yeah.
Like, yeah. So what are some like AI use cases that you think could be really beneficial?
Well, I think like again, things like sorting your library or something, or like categorizing things, or just making things more accessible. Because
Mm,
the problem is that nowadays you have a hard drive which is so big that you can collect enormous amounts of data and samples and whatnot. But
mm,
when you need them, it's very hard to find those things. And now we have, of course, in life you have sound similarity, which is helping
mhm,
with that. But it's just one mechanics of, it's not really AI in that sense. It's like a machine learning topic and so on. But AI could also expand this, in my opinion. Like, and also making even suggestions. I like if AI is like more like a suggesting thing. It just suggests something, you can take it or not. But I hate the idea that AI takes something over and does something for you, where you
mm.
don't really can't say, "Oh, did I do that?" or "Who did that?" Did AI do that?
Yeah.
Did AI
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
And so on. So I find that as a suggestive thing, I find AI quite interesting, and there's a lot of tools out there nowadays doing amazing things. And they even, this afternoon I tried out an AI tool which creates artificial vocalists to a MIDI phrase and so on.
Is it Ace Studio?
Let me wait. What
Ace
was?
Studio is a really
I
popular one that's
think
doing that
so. I
now.
think that's
Yeah.
what it was. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hilarious. It's really hilarious.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I find it interesting. Then, how can I misuse these things completely in a different way? This is always a question I have for any technology. How can I misuse it? Because I think the interesting stuff always comes from misusing it.
Yeah.
So that's how you get scratching and hip hop because and so on. So
Yeah.
to me, I think technology will evolve, whatever, and it will always do that. But then, how can you, as a human, misuse that in a creative, unintended way? I think that's the big question, and that's where the human
Mm.
creativity comes in again. So, yeah,
I really like that. I like, yeah, because AI is basically just a tool that can help inspire.
I hope so. The other,
Yeah.
well, unfortunately, I think it's. a tool often which is in the service of big companies, and that's a danger
Mm,
which we have no control over. And I think that's another topic that has nothing to do with music making so much. It's more the other aspect of AI, which is
yeah,
probably unavoidable. And I have no idea what will happen with that in the future. But
yeah.
yeah,
That'll be interesting to see because it's moving so fast. Just even ChatGPT and those mainstream tools now just
yeah,
really came out in the last couple of years.
yeah,
It's going to be
yeah.
wild to see what that looks
I
like.
mean, it's a we live in a interesting age now where I think we will see lots of changes on a technology level, and we see them already, but there will be even more. But it's very hard to predict
Hmm.
what benefit they will really bring because, well, as a human society, we have a bunch of problems nowadays. I don't think AI will help with those.
Yeah, there's definitely things that can't be solved. I love this kind of topic and this conversation, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. Like I've been wanting to have you on for a while, and you've worked on so many cool projects. It's a huge honor having you here. I did want to ask you if you wanted to ask my AI chatbot a question about either Ableton Live or music production.
If I want to ask a question,
Yeah, if you want to ask him a question. This is something I do at the end of every podcast episode just for fun to see what happens or what he says. And I don't know if there's too many guests on this podcast that would know maybe more than you do as far as Ableton Live or music production specific questions.
well, I would be interested if what your AI chat box says about Live 13, for example.
Okay, so this is a futuristic question, not something he would be trained on necessarily, but
Yes, it is.
it would be I'd be curious to see what he has to say. So what would you ask him about that?
What will Live 13 look like? What will what I mean, isn't it always interesting what will the future be like?
Yeah, let's see what he has to say. I don't know. Maybe he can. Okay, so he says I don't have any information on future
Yeah, of course.
releases of Live
Okay, then we need
13.
to find another question, of course.
So here's my other question: is like, would even 13 be a thing? Are you going to skip 13 and go to 20 like FL, or go to 14? Some people are like the number 13 is all scary.
We continue to work, but the number is, I mean, I don't know. I don't think did FL Studio skip 13
They did. They went from 12 to 20, I believe.
because of the Japanese market or what?
Or just like people think 13's bad luck. So that number sometimes is bad luck for
Do
people
you
or
think
whatever.
13 is bad luck then?
Actually, it's been good luck for me. Every Friday the 13th every year, I have a great day. I don't have a
I
problem with
also
it.
don't believe in that.
I don't
I think
either.
I mean, do we believe in superstition? That's a good question. I don't really think that.
No,
No,
it
no.
doesn't affect me. I'm just fine.
13 can be really good, I think.
Yeah, that's a great number.
We don't live in the dark ages anymore.
That's yeah, that's right. We've been enlightened.
We have been enlightened, yeah.
Maybe ask the question differently. His name's Abe, by the way. Abe the chatbot.
What is that? Can you tell me what that is? What is that like?
Abe is I think it's just like short for Ableton, I guess.
Yeah,
Abe.
yeah, but
I don't know.
what do you feed?
Oh, what is he trained on?
Yeah.
So he's trained on all the manuals. He's trained
Uh-huh.
on my podcast. So he knows all the podcast episodes. They've been transcribed. Then he knows a bunch of different of my favorite tutorial videos on YouTube. And he's trained on all my favorite plugins and Max for Live devices.
What is your favorite Max for Live device?
Mine or Abe's?
I don't know either.
We could ask Abe.
Yeah, let's ask.
Is your favorite Max for Live device? Let's see what he says. He says he doesn't have personal preferences or favorites. Well, that's a stupid answer.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one, what would it be?
Or what's the most useful Mac? I don't know, something. Useful.
Oh, so he picked the LFO.
Yeah, okay, good choice. Very good choice.
It's a good choice. You could use that for a lot of
It's a
things.
good choice. The LFO is a very versatile,
Yeah.
universal, and versatile tool indeed. Good
Yep.
choice.
Good choice, Abe.
Can't argue with that.
No, that's pretty solid. What about you? What is your favorite Max for Live device that either, let's do one that you've made and one that you haven't made. If you had to
Oh
pick two.
Lord. Oh God, that's a very difficult question because there are so many, and usually my favorite is the one I just did recently, always the last one, basically. So
Okay. Yeah.
today, I made a little grain delay thingy, which is different from the grain delay just to
Okay.
get a special effect. So that's my current favorite. And
Interesting.
my other favorite, well, I have to admit, the LFO is very tempting because I use
Yeah.
it a lot myself too.
It's a good one.
And I also start I went I mean, the LFO was one of the first Max for Live devices I did actually back in the days. And it was
Really?
a yes, and it was a very hard burst, how do you say, a hard thing, because
Yeah.
initially I wanted to pack in a lot of features, but then a colleague of mine said, "No, just throw it all out and make it very stripped down." And I
Yeah.
think it was a good thing to do that.
I think so too, because you can always add on later and then
Exactly.
pair it with
And
things. Yeah.
as a bread and butter tool, it should be bread and butter and not like a cupcake with whatever.
Yeah, and now it's built in as a native
Yeah.
effect,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
which makes so much sense. I didn't realize that you worked on that. You made that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, back in the days when this was happening, we had a little team doing Max for Live things, and we did like the envelope follower and the LFO and some of these things, and
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, also a long time ago actually. No, no.
I really like the sidechain update in the envelope follower.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
I did
that
that
was
too.
Oh, yeah, well, high five to you. That was a great
Yay!
one. I absolutely love
I
that
mean,
for
it was.
dynamic
I mean, it
EQs.
was just overdue, and so the reason there's a long technical reason for why it wasn't done earlier. But now it's a canonical thing to have the sidechain components, and they can be reused by any Max Live developer,
Yeah.
and I can just drag and drop, copy paste these things, and that's great. Now we have the sidechain. I mean, there were lots of other people were doing sidechains on maxolive.com with the similar thing, but now it's a canonical thing.
Yeah.
It's great. It's very useful. Yes.
Yeah. I think that was huge because there is no true dynamic EQ, and so I use it for that purpose now.
Yeah, that's you're not alone. I think with that, it's very easy to just map it to EQ8 and let the frequency bands bounce up and down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is like a workaround. Cool, man. Is there any Ableton Live feature request that you would love to see that isn't already built in? I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a few.
There is a long, long list in my head. Yes.
Yeah.
If you ask me now for the one thing I would like to
But you can
see,
pick more than one. It's okay.
well, for example, I would really love to work or to see more features on the mixer. I worked on the mixer, I did a bunch of overhauls, but a few things are not in there yet. Such, for example, VCA groups, VCA grouping. That would mean that
Okay.
you could, let's say, collect a bunch of faders and move them at the same time for a relative amount, and automate these things and so on, or
That's
even
cool.
store snapshots for mixer scenarios and things like that. That would be one thing I could imagine, but there are really
Probably use the variations device in the performance pack to do that, couldn't you? If you wanted to
you
snapshot.
of course, I mean, workarounds, there are plenty I can think of, but I mean, really,
Yeah.
like, built-in, straight, easy without thinking, without workarounds. So
Yeah.
that's to me, with workarounds, I can do everything, like with Max
Yeah.
Plug and so on. But that's the thing. When I want to make music, I don't want to think about workarounds. I just want to
Yeah.
do that stuff.
Yep.
So, no.
That makes sense.
But of course, I mean, you could set it up in a way that it becomes more for you, like almost built in. But again, I'm believing in some features they need to be. That's okay for have them as workarounds, and some other features they are part of the core, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get bombarded with tons of feature requests all the
Oh
time
yes, of
anyway. So
course. I
yeah.
mean, just look at the Ableton YouTube channels, and you will see many feature requests and so on.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also it's really important that there are feature requests because we basically Ableton is interested to evolve. It's interested to satisfy these needs. Of course, we are interested to make all the pain points go away. But no matter what you do, there will always be something. And then if
Yeah.
when you come out of the other end, there's the beginning again to fix or something like that. So
Yeah.
the most important thing is that it's still easy, fun, and inspiring. I think again, that's the ultimate thing.
Yeah. But I have a huge respect for you and Ableton and listening to all the user feedback and all the updates that your team has made. So a huge thanks to you and the company for being awesome. Yeah, want to respect your time and like, thanks for joining the podcast. This has been so fun hanging out. I feel like I
Well,
could keep going for a couple hours, but I'm sure we have things to do. Where's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to connect with you online, whether it's Instagram or wherever?
Instagram is fine, I think. Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter anymore for reasons. I'm on Blue Sky as well. Yeah.
I've never used Blue Sky before.
Well, I
Is
just
it
did it the other day, and it feels like the early days of Twitter, but different. So
okay?
I kind of like it because I meet a lot of the old pals there, which have same as I removed themselves from Twitter and
Yeah,
or X as it's now called. Sorry.
right. So it's basically like an early Twitter with a lot less fake accounts.
Absolutely, yeah. Much more pleasant. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Cool, man. Well, thanks, Christian, for hanging out on the podcast. Really appreciate you and all the work you've done. Yeah, everybody check out a link in the show notes. If you want to connect with Christian, I'll include all of his links there as well. But yeah, man, thanks again. And hope to connect with you maybe sometime when I come to Germany. Maybe I can say,
Yes,
hey, buy you a coffee or something.
let's do that. Now you get a coffee from me.
Oh, perfect. Even better. I love free coffee. Cool.
Good. Take care.
I'll talk to you soon. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Do me a huge favor if you would and hit that follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to the podcast. If you don't hate the podcast, please leave a 5-star review. It would help me out a ton. Don't forget to check back on Tuesdays for new episodes. If you want to be the first to get new episodes and stay updated and get free new devices and sample packs and other stuff that I'll be sending out in the future, join the newsletter. Just go to liveproducersonline.com/newsletter and or check out the links in the show notes. Make sure to give this guest a follow on the socials, give them some love for spending their time. And once again, thanks for listening to the podcast. I will see you next time. Later.